Let me just tell a little bit about why I decided to run and the reasons I'm running, and then hopefully that will convince you all and talk about then how actually I think we can win and what you all can do to help. But I've been working on good government issues, voting rights, money in politics for the last 19 years. I got started doing environmental organizing as a campus organizer at UC Santa Barbara with CalPIRG, and quickly ran into the problem of money in politics and the imbalance there on environmental issues. And so I moved to Washington, D.C. in 1995 and became the National Democracy Advocate for the state PIRGs, Public Interest Research Group is what that stands for, and became the first advocate in the country, even back in the 90s, calling for a constitutional amendment to overturn the Buckley versus Vallejo ruling, which is what first came down in 1976. Come on in, grab a seat. And then moved back to California in 2000 after marrying a woman from the Palisades. So have been here ever since. And decided to shift from that entire career of nonpartisan issue-based advocacy into running for office because I really feel like we're at a place in California where we need something other than politics as usual. Things are very bad, but on the other hand, I think we are at a turning point and on the threshold of some big opportunities. So on the very bad part, California, we're the 8th largest economy in the world, I think, depending on the year, right? Anyone want to take a guess where California ranks in terms of all 50 states in terms of voter participation?
In terms of what?
Voter participation.
43rd.
43rd. Close. I think the Pew Center of Research has us at 44th, but the U.S. Census Bureau has us tied at 48th. So depending on how you measure. Either way, we can be doing a whole lot better. And it's not just that that's an embarrassment, although it is, right? But there are very real-world implications of that because the electorate of California right now does not look like the people of California. The likely voters, the people who show up and vote, are much whiter, wealthier, older than the population as a whole. And we would be making wiser decisions, more forward-looking public policy decisions if we had the fuller diversity of California, if we had the youth of California participating in our electorate, in our public policy decisions. People say 2 heads are better than 1. I think that's true. I'd like to think 29 million heads would be better than the 15 million heads that we currently have showing up and voting. So that's the voters in part, right, of the money out, voters in. And there are a couple things that we could do, and in fact that we're on the edge of doing here in California to improve that. One is voter registration itself. We could be modernizing our process there and striking down sort of the bureaucratic paperwork aspect of the voter registration process by doing things that a number of other states have already done. Like ideally when you're 15 and a half and you go into the Department of Motor Vehicles and you're telling the state of California your name and verifying your identity and your address, we could just be automatically registering you to vote. Still wouldn't be eligible to vote until your 18th birthday, but you could be in the database, and then when you turn 18, you'd just be automatically registered. Campaigns could reach you, they could phone you, they could direct mail you, engage you, because we know from research that when you vote in that first election at age 18, it becomes a lifelong habit. And if you skip that first election, you often don't vote till you're 30, 35, 40. So that's a big opportunity of something we could be doing better. We could also be doing away with this 15-day voter registration deadline, which made a lot of sense, last century when people were registering with pen and paper, and there was a huge stack of registration forms that county registrars had to type in. It took 2 weeks to get that done before an election. But now, when it can all be done by computer, when registration can be done online, we can use a technique called same-day voter registration and allow people to register and vote all the way up until Election Day. A bunch of other states do this. North Carolina was doing this, and in fact, it worked so well in North Carolina to engage young people and people of color to vote that when Republicans took over the legislature, one of the first things they did was get rid of it. So the good news is we have passed same-day voter registration here in California. We have passed pre-registration of 17-year-olds, but they're not in effect. And they won't be in effect until our next Secretary of State completes a new statewide voter registration database. And I've been following this for the last 10 years. And we do have a contract signed. It's not scheduled to be done, though, until June of 2016. So we really need an elections expert and someone who has the management skills to run a 500-person agency and to oversee vendors. And these, quite frankly, aren't skills that you learn as a state legislator, where you're overseeing a staff of 3 or 4 people pushing policy. But as a national vice president of Common Cause, I was overseeing 35 staff all around the country. I was managing big budgets. I was dealing with vendors. And this is an issue that I'm committed to making happen. So that's one reason for optimism, is actually we've already passed these laws. We just need to get them put into place. And based on the experiences of other states, they'll boost our voter turnout by at least 5 percentage points and more like 9 percentage points among young people. So that's a big deal, right? And that's one thing that we can do. We're on the verge of doing. The other thing that I think would make a big difference, the Secretary of State is responsible for sending out the official state voter information guide. Hi, come on in. It's that newsprint booklet that you get in the mail about 6 weeks before an election, about 147 pages thick, the full text of every ballot measure, 10-point font, black ink on gray paper. You could not invent a more boring document if you tried it. And again, cutting edge last century, literally 100 years ago is when we first started sending this thing out. But I think the state that brought the world YouTube and the Apple iPhone could do a little bit better, right? Why don't we make a digital app of our voter's guide and email it out to everybody so that when you're getting ready to go vote or when you're at home filling out your vote by mail ballot, you could pull up not only the text of ballot measures if you wanted it, but how about also a series of online videos from every candidate for office and each side of every ballot measure explaining in plain English, here's what we're all about, right? That would create a level playing field where voters could hear from all sides, and it would do a lot to increase voter turnout. Right now, if you look at surveys, the number 2 reason that non-voters give for not voting is they don't feel like they have enough information, right? And we've all probably been there, right? You're staring at 2 names of people running for judge, and you've never heard of either one of them, right? How do you know who to vote for? You skip that race sometimes. People do. Sometimes people skip voting if they feel like they don't know enough about everything on the ballot. That's something in this day and age that we could fix, and the Secretary of State could do that. So that's second reason and second opportunity that I see. So we can get people registered. We can give them the information that they need to vote. But I think that the most difficult thing to overcome is this sense, this very real sense that people have that their vote doesn't matter, right? And when you've got 5 justices on the Supreme Court out there saying unlimited spending is the same thing as free speech, and striking down the Voting Rights Act saying, well, racism's kind of outdated in our country right now, we don't need that anymore, and saying that corporations are people that have constitutional rights just like you and me, that does send a message that your vote doesn't matter as much as the corporations and the billionaires. And I would like to tell people that's wrong, but I think they're basically right to conclude that. The deck is rigged against us, but the stakes are too high to just walk away from that. So we need to push back, and this is what Mary Beth's been doing, this is what I've been doing, this is what many of you in the room have been doing, is pushing to overturn the Supreme Court's ruling in Citizens United, right? I mean, if money is speech, speech is no longer free, right? It's expensive. And it means that only billionaires can afford to have their voices heard. So we've talked about what we did here in Los Angeles with Prop C, passed by 77% of the vote. We worked in San Francisco to get a similar measure on the ballot, passed with 82% of the vote. And people say, well, Derek, those are liberal places, right? And they are. But we did the same thing in Colorado, one of the presidential swing states, and in Montana, one of the reddest states in the country. Colorado passed with 74% of the vote, Montana 75% of the vote. So this is not a left issue, a right issue, a center issue. This is something that Americans across the political spectrum overwhelmingly agree on. And that's exactly the type of national consensus you need if you're going to pass constitutional amendments and overturn the Supreme Court. But the good news is we have that consensus, and we're demonstrating that again and again and again. And that's the first huge step, is getting to that point, and we're already there. So that's the good news there. I think our next step here in California is to create a statewide version here. And I'm hoping that could be on the ballot in November of 2014. I think there is a possibility of that happening. If not, it's something we'll keep pushing for. But my pledge as secretary is I will follow up on that by visiting every congressional district in California and holding a hearing to see what each member of Congress is doing to respond to the Citizens United ruling, to respond to the voting rights ruling, and most importantly, to respond to the express wishes and instructions of their voters who have weighed in on these issues already in 2 of our largest cities and hopefully soon statewide. So this is something that we can do. This is something that I think we must do, and people feel sometimes like it's too hard or too overwhelming, or the deck is rigged against us. But people have done far tougher things in the history of our country, and I think it's important to remember that whenever we're feeling sorry for ourselves, right? Look at John Lewis and the civil rights battles of the 1960s. Look at the battles for women's suffrage that took 80 years. So yeah, the deck is stacked against us, but no more so than many of our forefathers who have come before us and foremothers. And I think it's time that we rise to the occasion of our moment and do what we need to do to take our country back, just as others have done before us. So that's why I'm running. And this, too, is a difficult fight, right? I am not your typical career politician running for statewide office, and I knew getting into it that this would be a difficult thing for me to get elected as Secretary of State. So let's talk a little bit about why I think that's possible, and then what you all can do to help. First thing, as most of you probably know, it's an open seat. Secretary Bowen is leaving due to term limits. And it's really a wide open race. There are 2 other Democrats who are running, both of whom are state senators that are leaving the Senate. They were both elected in 2006 and both joined the Elections Committee in 2013, right as their term limits were coming up, basically. And I think there's a good argument to be made that 19 years of work focused solely on voting issues and elections issues is a better resume than 2 years on the Senate Elections Committee. And if everybody in the state, if every endorsing organization, if every voter took 60 seconds to research this race in the voter's guide and said, who's the most qualified candidate, I'm confident I would win hands down. And I do think some people will do that, but we know most people won't, right? That's not the way elections work in California. The reality is most people are going to be staring at a ballot with a bunch of names on that they've never heard of. Even people who know their own state senator haven't heard of somebody else's state senator, right? So the good news here is I'm very fortunate to have the campaign consultant that ran both of Deborah Bowen's statewide campaigns and is currently running statewide campaigns for insurance commissioner, for treasurer, for controller. He is one of the best, if not the best in the state at electing progressives to these down ballot statewide offices. And he's got a plan for us to get more name recognition than any of the other candidates through a pretty low cost direct mailing piece. So, series of pieces, I should say. So for folks who can contribute and have written checks, thank you. That's what the money is going towards, is building that name recognition. And that, on top of the qualifications, are some of the big reasons that I think we've got a good chance of winning. In addition, this is a race where nobody's going to have enough money to buy a week's worth of statewide TV advertising, which is minimally sort of what you would do if you were running a real campaign for Congress or the U.S. Senate or governor or anything like that. So it's a race where newspaper endorsements are going to matter a lot, where local group endorsements will matter a lot, where the net roots will matter a lot. So One thing that folks can do right now, you're probably familiar with the organization Democracy for America that Howard Dean started. I'm applying for their endorsement, and I know they're taking a close look right about now. So you can go to their webpage and look under endorsements and type in California, and a bunch of names will pop up, including mine, for various offices, and just click support there. It's a way of demonstrating to them that there are real people on the ground who care about this race and who care about me. Easy thing to do, and invite all your friends to do the same type of thing. You can like the campaign's Facebook page and share that among your friends, and sign up for our email list and forward those to your friends. What we're building is an infrastructure of grassroots communication that is important now at the activist level, but it'll be particularly important in May, as we head up for the election, which is on June 3rd, is the primary. So those are some of the ways that you can help beyond contributing. The other particularly important piece to this strategy is to make sure that the Democratic Party doesn't rally around one of the insider candidates. And I think we're pretty close to pulling that off, but we need some final help here down the stretch. The Democratic Party statewide convention will be here in LA, March 7th through 9th. And there'll be 3,000 delegates from across the state traveling here. It's very difficult for anybody to get the endorsement in an open seat race like that, because you need 60% of the delegates from across the state in a three-way race. And many delegates will vote just to stay out and not endorse at all. So it's a high threshold for anyone to get. And because of that, I think it's unlikely that either of these two insiders will get it. But we need to make sure we're doing our part and doing our organizing to make that happen. So we've got a sign-up sheet out here to check to volunteer. If you can help with phone calling between now and that first week in March, we've got the list of delegates all across the state. If you could take 100 of them or 50 of them and call them, and we can give you a script and a way to record that, that's an important thing to do. And we also need help with volunteers at the convention itself, you know, just doing the grassroots stuff of holding signs and handing out leaflets and talking to folks. So that's a push, particularly here in LA, that folks can be really helpful on at the volunteer level. And it is kind of cool, I think, that even though this is a statewide race, the grassroots really does matter in these particular instances at the convention and through just the word of mouth stuff closer to Election Day. So let me wrap up with that and